Hi guys, Matt Easton here. I often get asked about looking after swords, particularly antique swords, but also modern swords as well. It's the same, it doesn't make any difference. They're all carbon steel if they're real functional swords. And really, it's relatively simple to look after a sword properly. There are two main things which are your enemy. One is certain types of oil, acidic oil, and the other is moisture, obviously. Okay, so carbon steel will rust, it will get corrosion on it if it's not looked after properly. If it is looked after properly, it's actually very easy. Looking after swords, incidentally, is pretty much exactly the same as looking after guns. The only possible exception really is that some oils which are fine to put all over a gun, on the wood and everything else, are not very good for leather. So if you have a leather scabbard, for example, or sometimes swords have leather on the grips, just try not to get those types of oil which are designed for iron and steel. Try not to get those oils on leather or shark skin, as you sometimes get on some of these sword grips, or other kind of organic materials. Try and only get it on the iron and steel. Very simply, the oil that I would recommend is Ballistol, or Ballistol, depending how you pronounce it. I believe it is German. It doesn't actually say on here, but I believe it's German. But anyway, you can buy it pretty much everywhere. It's usually labelled as a gun kind of oil for preserving gun barrels and such like. Other oils such as WD-40 are fine, they're okay. The problem with WD-40 is if you have any moisture on steel and you spray WD-40 on it, it tends to trap the moisture underneath. So whilst it protects from moisture coming from the outside, it can trap moisture underneath it like a sealed layer. Whereas Ballistol, supposedly, obviously I'm not a scientist, I haven't tested these, but supposedly this kind of draws moisture away from the surface of the steel, and so it kind of coats the exact layer that's in contact with the steel. It makes sure there's no moisture there, which obviously is a good thing. There are also, aside from moisture, there are also the main oil, the main acidic substance that will come into contact with carbon steel or iron, which is very corrosive, is your hands, your fingers. Okay, so the number one rule of handling swords is don't touch the blade. Now obviously if you're practicing fencing techniques or even cutting, there are certain times when you will need to touch a blade, when you're sharpening it, maybe if you're half swording, if you're practicing disarms. There are all sorts of situations where yes, you will have to touch a blade, and that's fine. It's not going to instantly rust or turn black. However, what you should do is if you do touch a sword blade, you should remember that you've touched it, and you should make sure you rub it down with an oily rag afterwards. So you take your Ballistol or WD-40 if you've got some other oil. You can incidentally use olive oil and other types of oils as a temporary measure just to clean off the blade. It's better than, something like olive oil is better than finger oil. Finger oil will be corrosive, something like olive oil over a short period of time won't be, okay? But for long-term use something like Ballistol. And essentially you just put some on a rag and just rub it like an old tea towel or something like this, even an old t-shirt or something, and you just rub it over the metal surfaces that have been touched, and that goes for blades, hilts, parts of hilts and so on. So if I just take a sword off the wall here, the parts that you want to oil are obviously the blade, okay, and you can see this blade is in excellent condition, has been looked after very, very well. Scabbards, people often forget about scabbards. The reason that a scabbard like that one is utterly black is because at some point it's got a bit rusty and it's been handled by people's fingers for many, many years. So if you handle bare steel with your hands and don't clean it off, it will go that colour, it will go brownish, greyish black. Okay, so this has been well looked after. Obviously you put oil on the oily rag, rub over the blade, you also rub over the hilt parts, remember the back strap and the pommel, and try not to get any oil on the organic materials of the grip. Okay, and don't forget the scabbard as well if you want it to stay shiny. Some scabbards are blued or browned or blacked, as much like a gun barrel, for example, because that makes them more resistant to corrosion and oxidization, and that's absolutely fine. So there we go, there's a basic guide. Try not to handle blades. If you do handle blades, remember to clean them off afterwards. I do know somebody, and I may have mentioned this in a previous video, I do know someone who had a very valuable Japanese sword, and a customer of his touched the blade, but the person who owned the sword didn't realise it was put away back in its scabbard and left for some weeks, and when he took it out it had a perfect thumbprint in black printed on the, forensic evidence printed on the surface of the sword blade. Needless to say, it was a very expensive sword. It was a 10 or 15,000 pound sword, and it had to be sent off to be repolished to remove that black fingerprint or thumbprint, I think it was, from the blade. So very important you don't touch blades. Certainly don't touch other people's. If you do touch someone else's sword blade, make sure you tell them that their blade's been touched so that they can rub it down. If you don't have any oil to hand, incidentally, and someone's touched your blade and you're concerned about it, you can just take a t-shirt or a rag and just rub it. If you sort of disperse or rub off the worst part of the finger grease, then it will it won't have so much effect on the blade. So you can do that until you can get to some oil and properly clean the blade down. So there we go, guys, and I highly recommend Ballistol, and if the company's watching this, feel free to send me some free ones. Cheers guys, see you, bye.